What is worth living for? What is worth suffering for? These may sound like abstract philosophical questions, but really they're the most practical ones we can ask. The answers determine every choice we make, down to how you eat your bread and lay your bricks. There's a video that circulates periodically online. A grown man, usually young, sometimes not, performs some form of humiliation. Eats something disgusting, submits to some degradation, says something he clearly doesn't believe, and the caption tells you what he earned for it. The number is always specific. It's a false kind of modesty, and it's always somehow the most gut-wrenching part of the image. We live in an era of the voluntary indignity. Humans have always made spectacles of themselves. There's nothing remarkable or new about that. But it seems like recently something has changed. The spectacle is now offered with a casualness, and it's consumed with a hunger that's just as casual. If we spend any time at all online, we're probably participating ourselves. Who's left to ask how far is too far? Can we even answer that question ourselves? We used to have an answer, an internal compass we could consult, but it's been systematically dismantled. This video is about what that thing is. It's about dignity. Dignity isn't a feeling. It's not self-esteem and it's not confidence. And it's not the vague warm glow of being affirmed by people who agree with you. It's something more structural than any of those things, and more demanding. In a very real sense, dignity functions like a deity, an ordering principle that sits above the ordinary calculations of cost and benefit. It warns us that some things are not for sale. Not because they're too expensive, but because they're outside the economy altogether. Religions have always known this. They call the people who understand it most deeply their martyrs. And there's nothing in recorded human history that has taken so many willing people to their graves as the cluster of ideas that surround dignity. Countless people have given their lives for the honour, virtue, and the refusal to betray the truth. Modernity has done us a gross injustice that can't be overstated at the individual level. It has systematically uprooted our sense of what is highest, what's worth living for, and most importantly, what's worth suffering for. The head and the heart mean nothing without each other, and yet they have been surgically severed by what we might call the Great Sterilization Project. The project targets ideas first and values second, in a dogmatic redefinition of what it means to be human. Our deepest sources of meaning are reduced to the clinical and material. It's an inevitable consequence of an atomized capitalist society, and it leaves us culturally and spiritually homeless. What we've lost, I want to argue, is dignity. And the 4 books we're about to explore are some of the most powerful accounts in literature of what dignity actually is, what it costs, and why, against all odds, human beings keep choosing it. Let's start with what I mean, because the word has been softened almost beyond recognition. In contemporary usage, dignity tends to mean something like basic human decency, the minimum standard of treatment to which all people are entitled. But shouldn't we be aiming higher than this? Should we be settling for the bare minimum? This kind of dignity is a floor, not a ceiling. It's the lowest rung of the ladder, and treating it as the whole ladder is how we've ended up with a culture that can articulate the minimum, but has forgotten how to talk about the maximum. When you trace it through the traditions that took it seriously, dignity actually encompasses something much closer to virtue in the Aristotelian sense. Arete, excellence, the full realization of what a human being is capable of being. It involves courage, integrity, and virtuosity. The performance of one's humanity at its highest level, the way a musician plays the notes to bring life to the music underneath. Dignity is courage and virtuosity. It's the decision to inhabit your own life fully, sometimes at real cost, without flinching from what it might throw at you. It's also fundamentally relational, and this is the part that modern individualism has the most trouble with. Dignity isn't what you feel about yourself in private. It's what you are in the presence of others, how you carry yourself in the world that can see you, and how that carrying shapes the person you then become when no one's watching. Aristotle understood that virtue isn't a private achievement. It's a public performance in the classical sense, the enactment of the self in the community of others. You can't be truly courageous alone, just as you can't be generous without someone in need to give to. And you can't have dignity without a world in which your dignity is recognized and answered. This is why dignity, in its deepest form, is sacrificial. It always costs something. The dignified person doesn't behave with integrity because it's easy or cheap. They do so even when it's expensive. In fact, the greatest dignity can only come when something is really at stake. When the lie would be easier, when the capitulation would be safer, when the dignity costs them something real. Viktor Frankl spent 3 years in Nazi concentration camps, including Auschwitz and Dachau, and he was faced with one of the greatest challenges of dignity. He describes his struggle with characteristic precision in Man's Search for Meaning. Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. The freedom he's describing is more meaningful than pure escape from suffering. It's the freedom to meet that suffering with the spirit that won't back down, to refuse to let what happens to your body determine what happens to your soul. That freedom is dignity, and the consistent choice to exercise it builds the kind of character that draws us to stories like these in the first place. Dignity is shaped by our choices. It's an expression of free will with an inbuilt right answer. Like the Christian cross, it's something to bear, not a decoration or a symbol of easy triumph, but the weight you take on when you decide to live a certain way. It gets heavier the longer you carry it, and it bears sweeter fruit the longer you cultivate it. One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich seems like a pretty ordinary book at first. There isn't much of a plot. A man wakes up, works, eats, and sleeps. The day he lives through is like every other day in the Soviet labor camp where he's been imprisoned. It's brutal, cold, and threadbare, stripped of the comforts and routines of normal life. There's no family or privacy in the camp, and the men struggle to imagine a future for themselves. Perhaps despite this, or because of it, the novel is one of the most profound accounts of human dignity in all of literature. Because even in the midst of destitution, Solzhenitsyn's Ivan Denisovich Zhukov hasn't lost himself. The power of the novel lies in the idiosyncrasy of Ivan's small dignities. He eats his bread in a particular way and lays his bricks with a craftsman's pride. He removes his hat before eating, even though no one asks him to. Solzhenitsyn writes, Zhukov had his own way of eating. He didn't turn his spoon from side to side or hold it any old way. He used it properly, from the right side. These are not merely habits. They're the daily rituals of a man who chooses strength, who won't be reduced to the number on his uniform. Every maintained custom is a small act of resistance against the camp's primary project, which isn't the imprisonment of bodies, but the erasure of persons. Solzhenitsyn was writing from experience. He spent 8 years in the Soviet camp system, and what he witnessed was a systematic attempt to strip human beings of everything that makes them individuals. Their histories, skills, habits of mind, even their names, are targeted, and reduced to a unit of labour interchangeable with every other unit. The camp is the purest expression of what happens when the materialist worldview is taken to its logical extreme. People are resources which need to be managed. Management is efficiency, and efficiency has no patience for the friction of individual dignity. What Solzhenitsyn noticed is that the camp couldn't always finish their project. There was something in some prisoners that resisted reduction, kept their spirits safe, and Ivan is one of them. He's not heroic in the way that we might expect. He doesn't make grand gestures or brave speeches, but he has something that the camp can't reach, a kind of inner strength which shines brighter than the darkness of the camp can overshadow. He takes real pride in the quality of his bricklaying, even when the wall he's building serves his captors. After a good stretch of work, Solzhenitsyn writes, Zhukov felt quite pleased with himself. He took pride in his work, even in the labour camp. Materialism can't explain a paradox like this, and it's a paradox we all intuitively understand. Why would a man in a concentration camp take pride in work done for his oppressors? By any rational cost-benefit analysis, he shouldn't. The pride serves him nothing. He won't earn extra food or have his sentence decreased. It's not safe. In fact, it might even be dangerous. And yet, Solzhenitsyn is arguing, is the thing that keeps him human. Because the alternative, performing the work badly with contemptuous compliance, would be a different kind of loss. They already have his body, but Zhukov has figured out there's much more they can't get to. The philosopher Simone Weil wrote about the factory labour of the 1930s and described what happens to a person when work becomes purely instrumental. When it's reduced to a transaction, your time is traded for money, and nothing of yourself has been invested in the work. She wrote that the first effect of affliction is to make us lose our roots, to uproot us. Ivan Denisovich refuses to be uprooted. He works like it matters, because for him it does. Actually, it matters more than life and death. How you perform your work is a reflection of how you perform yourself. The quality of his bricklaying and the quality of his dignity are the same thing. There's also something important here about community. Ivan doesn't maintain his dignity alone. In its small way, the working brigade is a kind of moral community where men depend on each other and maintain individual and collective standards. They share bread and watch each other's backs. Solzhenitsyn is careful to show us that the dignified prisoners aren't heroes because their dignity makes them powerful, but because they understand solidarity. The gang boss Turin commands through respect instead of fear. He's a man who has maintained his standards under conditions that would destroy most people. And that's worthy of respect. Dignity, here as everywhere in this literature, is relational. It needs witnesses. Modern culture is allergic to this. We've been taught that the self is a private project, and that authenticity means ignoring the gaze of others and discovering who you really are, underneath all the social conditioning. But Ivan Denisovich knows something we've mostly forgotten. That who you really are is partly constituted by how you carry yourself in front of others. Strip that away, and you don't get a purer self. You get a diminished one. Charlotte Bronte published Jane Eyre in 1847, and its central moral argument is one that the 21st century is startlingly unprepared for. Jane Eyre is a woman with almost nothing. She has no money, no family, and no social standing. She's not even conventionally beautiful. In every external measure, she's powerless. What makes her such a compelling character is that she's one of the most dignified figures in English literature. Jane has grasped something that the people around her, with all their wealth and standing and beauty, have mostly missed. Dignity isn't made of your circumstances. It's a choice against them, and one we can all make if we're strong enough. The novel's defining scene is the one where Rochester, who's rich and brilliant and passionately in love with Jane, offers her a life that she could easily accept, one of luxury, passion, and connection. The catch is that he's already married. Jane is tempted, of course. She does love him, and she needs security. In material terms, she would be gaining everything. This is the moment when the late-stage capitalist logic, which measures all things by what they cost and what they return, would encourage her to take the deal. The calculation is obvious. But Jane refuses. And the reason she does so is so extraordinary and so unfashionable that we can't ignore what it says about her. She doesn't care about the legality or even the morality of it in the conventional sense. She refuses because she will not be what she would become if she accepted. I care for myself, she tells Rochester. The more solitary, the more friendless, the more unsustained I am, the more I will respect myself. I will keep the law given by God, sanctioned by man. I will hold to the principles received by me when I was sane and not mad as I am now. She knows she's half mad with love and desperation, and that every emotional current in her is pulling her toward Rochester. But she says no, because she understands that who you are is determined by what you do when saying yes would be easiest. This is how Bronte understood dignity. It's a freedom of choice which praises the hardest choices. Jane can't escape her circumstances, but she's free to choose who she wants to be within them. It's a choice made at the highest possible cost, and it's the choice that makes her Jane Eyre. Bronte is making an argument that the Romantic tradition often flinched from. That self-discipline is not the enemy of passion, but its proper frame, and that when you can't say no to yourself, even to your own most ardent desires, you're not free at all. You've achieved a different kind of captivity. The social context is enormously important here. Jane is a governess, a peculiarly liminal figure in Victorian society, positioned between the servant class and the family she works for, belonging fully to neither. She's educated enough to feel the weight of her social exclusion, and powerless enough to be unable to do very much about it. The world she inhabits is one in which women are routinely bought and sold. Their value depends on the invisible sense of the marriage market and on male approval. A woman's worth is equated with her social utility. Bertha Mason, Locked in the Attic, is the novel's image of what can happen to a woman in this kind of society. Seen through the eyes of a powerful man, she's only useful when she's convenient, and she'd better be both or else she'll be discarded. It sounds more like the life of property than of a person. At every stage of the novel, Jane refuses to be property. She knows the difference between property and people, and she insists on being treated like a person. As a child at Lowood, as a governess at Thornfield, as Rochester's almost wife, and the independent woman who eventually returns to him on her own terms. The vocabulary of rights, which is the bulk of our modern moral framework, barely existed in 1847. But what Jane did have was the vocabulary of dignity. She won't be looked down on. She won't be bought. She won't be made to feel less than what she is. She insists that she's real and that people should take her seriously. Not out of pride in the pejorative sense, but out of courage to say to the world that she won't be defeated by it. What makes the novel both remarkable and radical is that this dignity costs her almost everything, repeatedly, and she pays the cost every time with bravery. That's not something our cultural moment knows how to honour. We know how to honour people who succeed, and we even know how to honour people who fail spectacularly. But the person who refuses success that would require them to compromise themselves, who walks away from the deal because the deal is wrong, that person is difficult for a transactional culture to understand. Jane Eyre is difficult to understand. That's why she's been read for nearly 200 years. Bronte was herself living the argument. She published Jane Eyre under the pseudonym Currer Bell, because a woman with ambitions to serious literary standing was itself a form of indignity that the market wouldn't easily accommodate. She knew from the inside what it cost to take yourself seriously, to refuse the diminished version of yourself that a society organised around your subordination was constantly offering. We can see from Bronte's own dignity why she's given us Jane as its fictional form, her own refusal, immortalised in art. Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird is about many things: race, justice, childhood, and the daily struggles and joys of a small Southern American town in the 1930s. But at its moral centre is a single question. What does it cost to be the person who tells the truth when the truth is inconvenient? And why does anyone do it? Atticus Finch does it. He takes the case of Tom Robinson, a black man falsely accused of assaulting a white woman, in a town where the verdict is predetermined and the defence attorney is guaranteed to lose. He knows his own town and he's prepared for the worst. He's one of the few people in Maycomb who understands the consequences when he agrees to defend Tom Robinson. He knows he will lose the case and make enemies in the process. He expects his children to be mocked and threatened, and that the jury will convict a man they know to be innocent, but he takes the case anyway. When his daughter Scout asks him why, he gives her the answer that has stayed in the cultural memory for over 60 years. Before I can live with other folks, I've got to live with myself. The one thing that doesn't abide by majority rule is a person's conscience. He's talking about dignity here. Atticus is about to be exiled from his own life, but he knows he won't be able to look at himself in the mirror, or into his children's eyes, if he allows what he knows to be true to be silenced by what is socially safe. Dignity always costs something. It lives in the gap between who you are when you're at your best and what the world expects of you. The cost of dignity is that you can't always do what the situation makes easiest. The benefit of dignity is that you can live with yourself. To Kill a Mockingbird is more than a simple morality tale. It's a complete picture of dignified resistance, painted by Lee's precise hand. Atticus is an unassuming man, and he doesn't grandstand or make speeches in the town square. Instead, he sits outside the jail on the night when the mob comes for Tom Robinson, reading a newspaper alone with a lamp. When Scout and Jem run to him, they dissolve the mob's anonymity, and with it their courage. "What made you all come?" Scout asks Walter Cunningham. The question is so innocent and so direct that it breaks the spell. Atticus's dignity is above mere theatrics. It's patient and quiet and tangible, like a fact of nature, and it changes the moral atmosphere of every room he walks into. The novel's other great figure of dignity is Tom Robinson himself. His is the story of a man destroyed by a system that was designed to do just that. He's been convicted of something he didn't do. He gets shot trying to escape, and Atticus explains to his children why. He had probably given up hope, understanding that in this world, for this man, hope itself was an indignity he could no longer afford. Atticus says, Tom was a dead man the minute Myella Ewell opened her mouth and screamed. And he's right. And yet what Lee preserves in her portrait of Tom Robinson's testimony and his bearing in the courtroom is his dignity. He's faced with the decision to either submit or tell the truth, and he bears himself with integrity. He tells us what really happened, and it costs him his life. Dignity can't be captured in our desires or our survival instincts, because it transcends them. The philosopher Albert Camus wrote that the act of rebellion, of saying no this far and no further, is the founding moment of human dignity. I rebel, therefore we exist. The we is crucial. Camus understood, just as Atticus did, that dignity is not only about the individual who maintains it. It's about what that individual's dignity makes possible for the community around them. Atticus stands outside the jail to protect Tom Robinson, and he's also demonstrating to Maycomb, and to Scout and to Jem and to us, that it's possible to be this kind of person in this kind of world. The mob isn't the only solution to justice. In fact, it's barely a solution at all. Atticus demonstrates that there's another way. This is the prophetic function of dignity. The person who maintains their dignity in circumstances designed to strip it functions as a witness to what's possible. A proof of concept for a better way of being human. The martyrs of religious traditions have always functioned this way. They are evidence of something bigger than us. They show that the value they died for was real enough to die for. And by dying for it, they make it more real for the people who survive them. Scout is changed by watching her father, but she can't fully articulate what she's learned, because she's 8 years old and the world is still too big for her categories. But she has seen something. She's watched a man choose dignity over comfort, over safety, over social belonging, over easy peace, and seen that he came through it more himself, not less. That's a much harder lesson than do the right thing and everything works out. Tom Robertson does die, but not before Scout, and we learn something important. Atticus teaches us that when we do the right thing, we become someone who is capable of doing the right thing. The capacity for dignity, like all capacities, is built by use and eroded by disuse. Atticus uses it, and by using it in front of his children, he builds it in them. Modern culture has an uncomfortable relationship with this kind of dignity, because it's not rewarded by our man-made systems and institutions. It doesn't optimize for anything. It doesn't produce a better quarter, and it doesn't trend. The Atticus Finches of the world lose the cases, and the Tom Robertsons die. After the trial, the jury goes home and has dinner, and the town keeps going. Late-stage capitalism primes us to occupy a purely consequentialist position. On the surface, the whole enterprise looks like a failure. What Lee is arguing, and what the novel's enduring power attests, is that consequences and the measure aren't the same thing. The measure is what kind of person you are when the consequences arrive. Viktor Frankl arrived at Auschwitz in 1942. He arrived as a psychiatrist with a manuscript in his coat, a draft of the work that would eventually become Man's Search for Meaning, and the manuscript was confiscated. He spent the next 3 years in 4 camps, including Auschwitz and Dachau, watching people die and watching people live, and trying to understand what determined which was which. His conclusion might be surprising to a modern materialist who views survival as a competition of the strongest. The people who survived the camps were not always the strongest, or the most resourceful, or even the luckiest. Most of the time, they were the ones who had found a reason to live, who made their suffering meaningful even when they didn't choose it. Frankl wrote that he who has a why to live can bear almost any how. Here he's quoting Nietzsche, who makes the dignity argument at its most fundamental. The person with a sense of what their life means, what they serve and why they suffer, can endure suffering that would destroy someone without that meaning. In Frankl's account, this idea is inseparable from dignity. The person who maintains their dignity under dehumanizing conditions is the person who hasn't allowed their circumstances to tell them who they are. They've decided for themselves, and that decision, maintained at enormous cost, becomes both the reason for survival and its mechanism. In the camps, Frankl observed that the loss of dignity preceded the loss of life in a way that was more than just chronological. Some prisoners gave up. They stopped maintaining their small dignities, stopped caring how they ate and moved and presented themselves, and stopped bothering to preserve anything of their inner life. These prisoners tended to die quickly, not only because they had lost the will to survive, but because the self-abandonment itself was a form of death. They had agreed to be what the camp said they were, units of labour with no story of their own, no past that anyone cared about, and no future worth protecting. Once they agreed to that, there was nothing left to fight for. Frankl writes, "The way in which a man accepts his fate and all the suffering it entails, the way in which he takes up his cross, gives him ample opportunity, even under the most difficult circumstances, to add a deeper meaning to his life." The cross metaphor is deliberate. Frankl was Jewish, but he reaches for a Christian image because he's describing something that the Christian tradition understood better than anyone. That suffering, accepted with dignity, can be transformed into something meaningful. It can become testimony. It can become the evidence that what you believe is real enough to bear, real enough to die for, and real enough to be worth the wait. At its deepest level, dignity isn't the absence of suffering, but the way we meet it. Our dignity reveals and shapes what we actually believe. It shows us that we matter even when the world thinks we don't. Through it, we discover what we think is worth protecting when everything around us is crumbling. Frankl's account intersects with all 3 of the other books in a way that reveals the pattern. Ivan Denisovich meets his suffering by maintaining his craftsman's standards and his small daily rituals. Jane Eyre meets hers by refusing the compromise that would have relieved it. Atticus suffers through knowing the world will punish him for his actions, but meets it by listening to his conscience anyway. All of them make the same fundamental choice: to sacrifice for what's really valuable and really theirs, rather than to go home comfortable and empty-handed. They have different ways of showing it, but they all understand that this isn't a personal choice. It's one they make within a community, surrounded by witnesses. The consequences of their choices affect others too. Ivan's dignity keeps his brigade human. Jane's dignity makes Rochester worthy of being loved. Atticus's dignity makes Scout capable of seeing what justice looks like. Frankl's dignity, and his account of others in the camps, makes it possible for the rest of us, decades later, to understand what human beings are capable of. In the end, dignity is always relational. It's an offer made with intention, and witnessed by people who may or may not be on your side. It's an act that changes both the witness and the one who is being witnessed. The late capitalist impulse fails to account for this. It's too busy measuring everything by its transactional yield to even notice. It can tell you what dignity costs, but it can't tell you what it is. I think there's something more dangerous going on here than a technical error. Our culture's relationship to dignity is changing. We've become allergic to sacrifice and the relational idea of identity. We've forgotten dignity, and we're steadily forgetting how to make our suffering transformative. With that gone, it's hard to live a life worth more than its material contents. All 4 books share something important, and it's easy to miss because it moves silently beneath their surface arguments. They're all stories about being seen. Ivan is seen by Solzhenitsyn, who was himself a prisoner and who turned his witnessing into art. Jane is seen by Rochester, eventually as herself, as more than a governess or a woman to be pitied. She's an equal. Tom Robinson is seen by Atticus, who tells the jury the truth about him, even knowing they won't believe it. Frankl is seen by himself, with a clarity that the horror around him can't distort, and then seen by us, his readers, across the decades. Being seen matters, because dignity can't come alive fully in your head. It requires recognition. Axel Honneth argues that human beings require recognition, from love, from law, from community, to develop and sustain a coherent sense of self. People are denied recognition when they're treated as invisible, or subhuman, or interchangeable. It's a struggle for them to maintain their dignity, because dignity is partly a social achievement. It exists in the space between people. This is why the act of bearing witness is a moral one. It's the truest way of seeing another person. It's what Atticus does for Tom Robinson in that courtroom. He can't save him, but he can see him. He can address the jury as though they're capable of seeing him too. And in doing so, he performs the act of recognition that the social world around them is determined to deny. In our courts, Atticus tells the jury, all men are created equal. He knows they won't believe it today, but he says it anyway. The dignity lies in the act of saying, regardless of what it produces. There's a passage in Jane Eyre in which Jane says to Rochester, I am no bird, and no net ensnares me. I am a free human being with an independent will. It's easy to see this as a speech about women's rights, but when you look more closely, you can see Jane is demanding to be seen. To be looked at as who she is, rather than as what is convenient for him, or what the social world has decided she is. She's insisting on her own individuality, that her full self can't be reduced or objectified. The demand to be seen is the demand for dignity, and the willingness to really see another person is a creative act. To look at them in their full complexity and full particularity, without turning them into a representative of a type or a unit in a calculation, is to participate in dignity. Crucially, it's also a form of self-discipline. To truly see someone requires a kind of self-forgetting. It requires setting aside what's convenient and what's comfortable. It's asking you to stop looking for confirmation of what you already believe, and look at what's in front of you. Self-forgetting helps you find the capacity to attend to something other than your own needs and preferences. This is exactly the capacity that the culture of self-expression and self-promotion most effectively destroys. Modern culture is constitutively bad at seeing other people. The architecture of social media, the profile, the follower count, and the engagement metric, trains us to perform ourselves for an audience so completely that we forget about the real people in our lives. You can't fully perform and fully receive simultaneously. The culture that teaches us to be always performing also teaches us to be always alone. This is the connection point between the loss of dignity and the sterilization project that modernity represents. It's not only that we've lost the vocabulary for dignity, we've also lost the practices that develop and sustain it. Attention, witness, meeting each other in our full particularity rather than our social legibility. Ivan Denisovich has these practices. Jane Eyre has them. Atticus Finch has them. Viktor Frankl cultivates them even in Auschwitz, because without them he can't see the people around him clearly enough to help them. There's a late-stage capitalist logic that runs something like this. Everything has a price, and the only question is whether you know what yours is. It's a logic that presents itself as hard-headed realism, as the opposite of naive idealism, and as what adults believe once they've outgrown their illusions. I think it's one of the most impoverishing worldviews ever devised, because in it, all people have a price. There's no room for someone who looks at what's being offered and says, not that the price is too low, but that they're not for sale. Dignity is the ordering principle that tells us we aren't for sale. It is, as I said at the outset, a kind of deity. Not a supernatural being, but a force that sits above the ordinary calculations to reassure us that some things are not negotiable. The religious traditions have always understood this, and you don't need to look any further than the martyrs to see it. At their core is a claim about something worth more than life itself. A life lived in betrayal of what is most worth protecting is not one worth aspiring to. The martyrs care about their lives just as much as you and me. They die because they found something they care about more. This is the thing that modernity has most effectively dismantled. Our culture, the secular one at least, no longer believes in something more important than our own lives. The noble art of martyrdom remains only for the religious. In a culture organised around the maximisation of comfort and the avoidance of suffering, there's no framework for the person who voluntarily accepts suffering in the service of something larger than their own well-being. From inside the consumerist framework, that person looks like a fool. And so the culture produces fewer and fewer of them. But the capacity for that kind of dignity, for the recognition of something worth suffering for, is not just a nice to have. Frankl would argue it's the thing that makes human life meaningful in the deepest way. If there's nothing in your life more important than comfort, then what you really have is nothing. And so escapism becomes a good coping strategy. If all you have are preferences, pleasures, and avoidances, what happens to your sense of who you are? What all four books are showing us is that dignity is a practice, and one that requires sacrifice. It's an act of real courage, a relational way of meeting the world so that it sees you, of maintaining standards under pressure, and of extending genuine attention to others. At the root of dignity is a refusal to take the easy way out. And over time, the root grows to become a magnificent tree of meaning and self-discovery. Ivan Denisovich practices it in the bricklaying. Jane Eyre practices it in the Refusal. Atticus practices it outside the jail and in the courtroom. Frankl practices it in the camps, and in the deliberate attention he extends to his fellow prisoners, even while suffering himself. All of them know, in their different ways, that dignity must be chosen. If it were forced, it would lose its power. It can't be inherited, and it can't be produced by comfort or good circumstances. Ivan has no good circumstances, and Frankl has almost none. Yet they make a daily choice against the available alternatives, at a cost that's excruciating to bear. Our morality is what makes us special as human beings, and it will be the last great front in the struggle against reduction. Everything else about us can be automated, replicated, optimized, and commodified. The capacity to choose what's worth suffering for, to orient ourselves in relation to something more important than our own lives, that can't be replicated. It's the last irreducibly human thing, and our culture is giving it away. I want to leave you with a word that appears in all four of these books, in different languages and different contexts. Worth. Ivan thinks the day was worth it. A good day by the standards of a labour camp. Jane decides she's worth more than what Rochester is offering. Atticus tells Stout that some things are worth doing even when you lose. And Frankl argues that suffering is worth bearing when there's meaning to be found in it. Worth is the currency of dignity. It's nothing to do with economy or utility. This can be assigned by others and can therefore be revoked by others. It's a different kind of worth, one that's becoming increasingly unfamiliar to our culture. The kind that is established by your relationship to what you believe, by what you're willing to bear and what you refuse to surrender. In the end, that's a question we must answer for ourselves. What is worth living for? What is worth suffering for? These may sound like abstract philosophical questions, but really they're the most practical ones we can ask. The answers determine every choice we make, down to how you eat your bread and lay your bricks. You have the choice to refuse the man you love, to sit outside a jail at night, and treat those around you well even when all of you are suffering. Those choices determine who you are when the pressure is highest and the costs are clearest, and the easier path is right there in front of you. Dignity is the most serious choice we can make. It's the commitment to having a what I will not do, a line you won't step over, no matter the material gain. It's the recognition that you're in relationship to other people, to what is right, and to something more important than comfort. But no relationship is one-sided. These two will make demands on you that your comfort doesn't get to veto. Modern culture has tried to free us from those demands. It has tried to give us the self without the weight. We can see the result in the countless online humiliations exchanged for pocket money, and in the pervasive sense that nothing is quite real or quite worth it. Ours is a civilization that has made dignity a wallpaper, Something shiny and easy that only serves to cover up the rotted wood beneath. The real body of dignity is dying. But these 4 books give it back, as a life force and as a practice, as a way of becoming more fully ourselves and living a life where our choices have meaning. All 4 stories teach us a valuable lesson on how to bear the weight, and how to be worth something more than money can buy. In the end, that's what dignity is, and we're going to need it.